Hello everyone, and welcome to the 57th episode of Analyzing Evil, featuring Griffith from Berserk, a legendary villain from a legendary story. Griffith is one of the most iconic manga villains of all time, a mysterious force of unbreakable will that arose from nothing and ascended to the heights of cruel godlike power. In this video, we'll be discussing all of who Griffith is and his deeds, examining the man he was and the events that led to him transforming into a monster of unimaginable power and cruelty. Before we get to Griffith, I'd first like to dedicate this video to the late Kentaro Miura, a man who's had a great influence on my life and the lives of so many others. Games, shows, music, art, literature, so many things in the dark fantasy genre and beyond were influenced by Kentaro, his work inspiring thousands upon thousands of people all across the world. None of us know when our time will come. All we can do is live our lives to the fullest and hope that the lives we touch along the way are bettered by our presence. And Kentaro Miura surely left his mark on the world as a genius among men and an artist that few in this world can hope to equal. He will be missed, but the fact that he was here to grace us with his person was a gift enough in itself. Thank you for everything, Kentaro, and rest easy. Now without further ado, let's begin. Let's start by talking about who Griffith is, while we cover the events that transpire in this story. Now we don't know very much about his backstory. We know that he was a street urchin as a child, yet another boy forgotten by society in the cruel world of Berserk. But we don't know under what circumstances he came to be in this position. What we do know is that Griffith's goal of one day obtaining a kingdom of his own has been present within him since his youth. Even so, we don't know to what degree this dream was solely a product of his own desire, or the influence of the Godhand, as it would seem that the Godhand have more or less always been present in his life, as Griffith was the man prophesied to obtain the Crimson Beherit, and his obtainment of this object from a gypsy was also likely orchestrated by the Godhand. This same gypsy told Griffith that whoever held this item in their possession was destined to conquer the world, and with a dream of obtaining a kingdom of his own already in his sights, this prophecy only spurred Griffith on towards what I'm sure he felt was his destiny. In that same vein, we have no idea how much of an effect that the Godhand has had on his entire being. Griffith is an exceptionally talented and tenacious man. There are several times throughout this series where he displays his talents as a swordsman, a tactician, and a manipulator. His will is ironclad, and he's proven that he's willing to do anything and everything in order to achieve his dream, choosing the most logical approach in every situation he finds himself in, even if it means having to endure harm to his own person. A steadfast tenacity that allows him to weather any kind of pain, be it physical, emotional, or even sexual, as we see when he offers himself to Lord Genin in order to provide safety and security for his soldiers, reasoning that seducing one man is a far superior tactic than running into battle 10 times and losing hundreds of soldiers. His relationship with Lord Genin shows us yet another crucial aspect of Griffith as well, as upon meeting with him once again after capturing Doldre, Griffith takes his life. But he doesn't do so in order to satisfy his revenge. Rather, he kills him to ensure that no rumors spread around Midland about Griffith ever engaging in sexual relations with Genin, as the revelation of that particular deed to the public would damage his image and severely lower his chances of ever obtaining his dream, which again emphasizes how Griffith is able to bury his emotions and commit himself to a logical approach in order to achieve his goals. This isn't the only kind of shady endeavor that Griffith is willing to undertake, as we see that he's more than willing to utilize assassination and subterfuge to get what he wants, like when he has Guts assassinate General Julius, or when he kidnaps Minister Foss's daughter so he can corner him into participating in a plot to kill the Queen of Midland. However, it can't be said that he doesn't have a conscience of some sort, as we see him asking Guts a few times throughout this series whether or not he thinks him to be cruel, which indicates that he doesn't exactly enjoy some of the terrible things he has to do, and he's worried on some level about how others may perceive him after committing these less than noble acts. Now Griffith is naturally gifted. However, a great part of why he's so skillful is because of his confidence. Outside of being born in a disadvantageous position, Griffith isn't a man who loses often, and his confidence in his own abilities makes him feel as if he's near immortal, so long as he plans accordingly. But the reason why Griffith doesn't lose very often could be because of the influence of the Godhand, which would in a way make his confidence artificial. Because of his position as the prophesied White Falcon, the fifth member of the Godhand, chosen from birth to become king of the mortal realm, Griffith was given a certain amount of supernatural protection throughout his life that aided him in succeeding in any dicey situations he found himself in, like when the Crimson Beherit saved him from the wrath of Nosferatu Zod, or when it blocked a poisoned arrow that would have taken his life. Again, he is, without a doubt, naturally gifted and talented, but it's still worth noting that all of his talents could be the result of his predetermined position in the universe, and without the aid of the powers that be, perhaps Griffith may have met a foolhardy end far sooner in his life. It's not only his talents that give him the upper hand in his endeavors, though, as his appearance and personality play a large part in his success as well. Griffith is beautiful, his androgynous appearance giving him the effeminate and gentle beauty of a woman and the quiet, dignified features of a lithe and muscular young man in his prime. It's this striking beauty that initially attracts people to Griffith for a number of reasons, and his indomitable personality binds them to his person, inspiring loyalty and respect in those who are enraptured by him. He's charming, witty, clever, wise, respectful, and charismatic, a man who draws others in with his exceptional person and drives those who envy him into utter hatred of his being. He's narcissistic to a certain extent, in that his dreams are entirely centered around his own desires, and he takes a possessive attitude towards many things in the series, namely the things that he believes belong to him, like his men. But his narcissism isn't overwhelming to the point where it affects his character in a negative way. Rather, his self-righteous nature actually helps to heighten the loyalty of his men. He's incredibly perceptive as well, and he's able to discern a person's motivations and thoughts through their body language or speech, which I'm sure helps him identify with his men on a deeper level, and we often see him giving his enemies a wrathful stare when he confirms that they've attempted to betray him in some way. Mystery plays a part in the feelings he inspires in his men as well, as Griffith is an enigma to them, as Judo explains to Guts when he tells him why these men follow Griffith in the first place. They don't know whether he's a villain, a hero, or something in between, and though he can be a stern and ruthless battle commander in one moment, he can also take on a childlike persona in the next, further adding to the allure of his person. However, though he plays the part in order to bolster the morale of his soldiers, Griffith isn't what you would call a benevolent leader, as he primarily views the members of his band as nothing more than a tool that he can use to further his own ambitions, stating to Casca in a flashback in Volume 7 that he doesn't feel responsible for the men who lost their lives under his command. However, in the next panel, he confesses that the reason he feels this way is because they made a choice to put their lives on the line in order to fulfill his dream, and he states that the only way he can make it up to them is by fulfilling the dream they gave their lives for. This is tricky, because he seemingly contradicts himself here, but this shows us something important about Griffith, and that's that he does care about his men, but his desire to see his dream realized supersedes any tender feelings he may have for them. This notion is made abundantly clear after his transformation, which we'll get to soon, but there is a good example we're given of this mentality during the Golden Age arc. In Volume 6, Griffith explains to Charlotte that the reason you find people in the world who are willing to shed blood and commit violent acts on the battlefield is due to the people engaging in this behavior pursuing a precious thing, specifically a dream. To Griffith, a dream is the most precious thing in the world, and the most virtuous thing a man can do for himself is strive to achieve his dream at any cost. He recognizes that there are dreams so grand that they swallow thousands of other dreams like a storm, dreams martyred for the sake of the grand dream of another. He then goes on to explain to Charlotte that he doesn't consider the men under his command to be his friends. He considers them excellent troops and valuable comrades, and recognizes their devotion to his dream, but the only person he would ever consider to be a friend would be the one that pursues their own dream without bowing to the will of his dream, a man or woman who he would consider to be his equal. Now, this doesn't sound too terrible at a glance, but it highlights how he views his men as nothing more than crucial assets in the fulfillment of his dream. There are two exceptions to this, one of them being Casca, who, as we see in a dream Griffith is having while imprisoned, is someone that he could see himself marrying, a woman he would potentially set aside his dream for and live an average life with. The other exception is of course Guts, who he saw from their first encounter as someone who had the potential to be his equal, his only friend, and right from the beginning of Guts' service, he engages with him on a friendlier level than he does with any other members of the band, which, as we'll soon cover, would end up being one of the primary catalysts for his transformation into a demonic being. In a similar way, Griffith doesn't exactly believe in helping people directly. Rather, he wishes for them to carve their own path in the world, like we see when he saves Casca from being violated in a flashback by throwing her a sword and having her save herself. Now, the thing about his dream is that it isn't what you would call noble, as it's not a cause built upon the promise of something valiant, like justice or freedom. No, All Griffith ever states is that his dream is to establish a kingdom for himself. He never states that he wants to create this kingdom to better the world. He only states his desire to rule, to be recognized as a great man who sits at the pinnacle of power. Would a kingdom overseen by Griffith likely be a prosperous one? I'm sure it would. Would the men who survive their campaigns live better lives in his kingdom? Undoubtedly. However, does Griffith care about that? Hardly. As we covered earlier, the only justice he sees fit to bring to the men who die for his cause is the post-mortem satisfaction that they died so he could attain a lofty position in the world, and any comfort they may find in his new kingdom would only be a side effect of his dream, not a goal of it. Even so, due to him playing the role of a caring leader to inspire loyalty in his men, the members of the Band of the Falcon are treated quite well, as they enjoy a comfortable existence that many mercenaries fail to attain. And even though Griffith is using these men to fulfill his own dream, it's this dream that keeps them bound to one another, as rather than simply being a band of brigands looking out for only themselves and their own wealth, they have a heightened sense of comradeship, a common goal to rally towards, and they look out for one another as if they were part of one large family. All of who Griffith is, his person, his plans, the fervent support of his men, and his ambition ultimately lead him to a position of power and prestige that a commoner in the world of Berserk could only ever dream of obtaining, the position of Lord and General in the army of a great kingdom. Throughout the endeavors we're privy to, we've seen him attain this power through his own determination and skill, through careful political plotting, and strategic victories in crucial battles. And all of this comes to a crumbling end due to one thing he had never allowed himself to fall prey to before: emotional attachment. As I said earlier in this video, Griffith isn't a man who loses often, and when he does, the losses are relatively insignificant, and they don't in any way cause his resolve to falter. And part of the reason for that is because his focus is centered directly on his dream, and any obstacles that happen to appear in his path are of no consequence to Griffith, as he has full confidence in himself and his ability to obtain what he desires. Similarly, he never allowed himself to feel overwhelming remorse for the lives lost in service to his desires, allowing him to expend his men as needed. All that changed when Guts entered his life, the only true friend that Griffith had come to know during his time as leader of the Band of the Falcon. When Guts leaves Griffith behind, Griffith is devastated for two reasons: because he lost his only friend, and because he was bested by Guts. Again, Griffith has known little loss in his life, and to lose both the only man he admired and cherished as a friend, and his honor as an undefeated god among men, was nothing short of crippling. Lying defeated in the snow, he watches dumbstruck as this man who he had come to love as his equal walks away from him as his superior, never turning his back as Griffith comes to terms with the tragedy that has just befallen him. In this moment, his mind is reeling. What have I done wrong? How could he abandon someone like me? Why would he betray the friendship we had built over these last 3 years? He bested me. No one bests me. Am I losing my edge? Oh God, what am I going to do without him? How will I continue knowing this defeat? And in this irrational state, with his mind roiling with all these negative thoughts, he makes his way to the bedchambers of Princess Charlotte, partly to find comfort in her embrace, but more so to drown out the ceaseless thoughts and emotions that are tormenting his soul now that Guts has abandoned him. While making love to Charlotte, Griffith can only think of Guts and the image of his backside as he left him, the image of the person he held dearest to him beating him into the ground and leaving him to wallow in sorrow. This choice that Guts made would be the beginning of his journey to realizing his own dream, but this beginning for Guts spelled the beginning of the end for Griffith, the valiant leader of the glorious Band of the Falcon. What occurs the following day after his sojourn into Charlotte's bedroom is a testament to how the achievements that a person builds over a lifetime of hard-fought labor can crumble in an instant due to one bad decision. Banished to an abyss far below the earth to be tortured for a year, the once brilliant White Falcon is reduced to an emaciated husk of a man, his arms rendered useless, his legs non-functional, and his voice stolen. After being rescued from this hell, Griffith is altogether grateful and spiteful, his hand wrapping around Guts' throat as he's being rescued, emphasizing the bitter feelings he holds towards his erstwhile friend for abandoning him. When he sees Casca and Guts embracing outside his caravan, he resents the health of his friend and his ability to live his life as a complete person, a life that was taken from Griffith because of his decision to abandon him. Spurred on by a vision of his former self calling him to his dream, he takes the reins of his caravan and rushes recklessly off into the horizon to continue his eternal quest to satisfy his ambitions. Only the vehicle of his desire catches in its pursuit of this lofty and now unobtainable goal, sending Griffith careening into a puddle of his own despair. Broken beyond repair and distraught beyond belief, he nearly ends his life before his hands fall upon the object of his destiny, the egg of the king that found its way back to the man prophesied to inherit the power of a god. And with this item in hand, and the moon crossing the path of the sun, Griffith enters the realm of his dark fate. Here, before the angelic demons of the astral world, Griffith is offered a choice: sacrifice everyone left to fight for his cause, or live out the rest of his days a shattered man among the remnants of his dream. To coax him into doing the unthinkable, Ubik reminds him how many bodies he's sacrificed so far in order to obtain his dream, and he helps Griffith remember that he knew full well that the men under his command were going to die for his ambitions, and that he never really cared whether they did or not. And so, conditioned by pain and desire, Griffith relents and sacrifices the men who remain to him, becoming a man reborn as the fifth angelic demon of the Godhand, Femto, a sleek bird-like creature with blood-red reptilian eyes, the Black Falcon, born from the remains of the White. And not only does he offer up the men who dedicated their lives to him to be slaughtered and consumed like cattle, but he descends from his perch to rape Casca in order to spite Guts, staring into his eyes as he violates her, breaking this woman's mind as Guts watches on helplessly. Now before we continue, we should talk about causality and fate. First, what exactly is causality? The simplest definition of this term is the principle of cause and effect, but within the context of the Berserk universe, it has a far deeper meaning. Essentially, causality is the current of events in this universe that are in part determined by fate, with the caveat that everything that happens within the flow of causality is ultimately made up of choices made by humans, and which choice an individual human will make is by no means certain, but each and every human is bound by this principle, and for every action they take, the cause, there will be a reaction, an effect, that will alter the course of their lives and the lives of those around them. However, the choices that humans make can be greatly influenced by outside forces. This is reflected in the fact that Griffith had a choice in sacrificing his comrades, as he could have easily declined the Godhand's offer to use his men to ascend to their ranks. The Godhand has a greater understanding of the flow of causality than most, and are thus able to more accurately predict the events that will transpire in this world to a greater degree than others. And by extension, they can influence the events of the world in order to guide them along the path they want. But as Slan points out during the ritual, they aren't omniscient, and they can't predict the future. And though Griffith was goaded into making his choice, he was still the one who made this choice of his own free will. For the purposes of this video, this explanation will suffice. However, if you'd like to delve deeper into how causality affects the events and characters of this story, there's a video by Alex Enterprises that goes into detail about how this concept has an effect on the world of Berserk and the events that transpire in this story. And rather than going into a lengthy explanation of causality as it relates to this story here, I recommend you watch his video on the subject, which I'll link in the description. So, with this in mind, was Griffith's transformation into Femto a destiny he could not escape? Not exactly. Griffith couldn't escape being presented with the opportunity of undergoing this transformation, as the events of his life have been heavily influenced by outside forces to bring him to this choice. But again, even though he was pushed into making it, he made this choice of his own free will, thus making him responsible for the deaths of his comrades in that moment. And now that he's become this demonic entity, what's changed in his personality? Unfortunately, we're given very little exposure to Femto in this story, as outside of his emergence at the ritual, we only see him in this persona again during the Black Swordsman arc, and when he's taking on Emperor Ganishka. In the Black Swordsman arc, he's condescending and lofty, belittling Guts, and expressing cruelty akin to his counterparts as they attempt to drive the Count into sacrificing his daughter. And when he's atop Ganishka, he's much the same person he is here, but that's about all we get. Upon being reincarnated into his human form after the events at Albion, Griffith confronts Guts in order to determine whether or not he still has tender feelings for him, which he discovers he doesn't, affirming for himself that his ascension has allowed him to shed the emotional limitations of his mortal life. However, this isn't entirely true, as Griffith still feels a tinge of emotion here, and as we'll soon cover, this tinge is much more than a slight nuisance that he can't ignore. In this new form, he retains much of the personality he had before his transformation into Femto, but now he exudes an aura of brilliant determination, an already glorious persona magnified tenfold by the divinity granted to him. Presenting himself as the savior of the world, Griffith manipulates events in the realm of the Holy See so that he emerges as the sole protector of the Kingdom of Midland, a shining bastion of hope, driving back the encroaching darkness of the Kushan Empire, led by the dread Emperor Ganishka. The full extent of his godly powers is unknown, but it's safe to say that Griffith is nigh immortal in this state, and he's just as skilled at combat as he was before his ascension, his supernatural powers bolstering his natural talents to an extreme. And now, with his insight into the flow of causality to aid in his endeavors, he outmaneuvers each and every one of his enemies, either destroying them or converting them to his cause. And before slaying Emperor Ganishka, he was indeed fighting on behalf of the people of the world, slaying demons and enemy combatants alike, and saving countless lives in the process. However, just as the comfortable lives that the former members of the Band of the Falcon lived were only a byproduct of his pursuit of his dream, so too are the lives he saves during this time period, as upon redirecting the sword of the Skull Knight to rend the eldritch form of the bestial Emperor Ganishka, the legions of hell spill forth and begin ravaging the entire world, devouring all human life in sight as the land overflows with monstrous creatures. Thus, the age of darkness that was foretold begins, and the world becomes a vast hellscape where humans fear to tread, fighting for their lives as astral creatures consume them and send the world into chaos. That is, most of the world. In bringing forth this veritable apocalypse, he establishes a false heaven for the surviving humans to flock to, Falconia, his very own kingdom of light, where he appears as the savior of the world sent to deliver humanity from the carnage they face, fooling the world into believing this falsity as he sits atop this world that he brought destruction to. In his position as ruler, Griffith is nothing short of a godly facade. He brings prosperity to the people who survive the calamity he creates. He uses his supernatural powers to allow them to see their loved ones after they pass. He rules justly and wisely, and defers to his ministers when making decisions, and he proclaims that he will reconquer the world and drive out the demon threat, ushering in the Gilded Age of the Second Empire. This is all well and good, but as we know, the brightest light casts the darkest shadow, and the world wouldn't be in such a sorry state if it weren't for his actions. This is everything that Griffith ever wanted, and more. He now not only has his own kingdom, but the kingdom, the most powerful nation in the world, with himself as its ruler. However, as a consequence of his rebirth through the distorted child of Casca and Guts, he still retains some of his humanity, and the tender feelings he thought he had shed remain. On nights when a full moon hangs in the sky, he transforms into the child that would have been, wandering between the astral and physical world. In this form, the thoughts and feelings of this would-be child meld with his own, and due to this, he finds himself assisting Guts several times when he's struggling, saving his life where the soulless Femto would have simply let him die. The final chapter of this story is where this information is revealed to us, and though Griffith has attained his dream, it would seem that it hasn't brought him the fulfillment he once thought it would. And now, sitting upon his throne, he feels isolated, a man with so much power, but no substance, and he mourns for the opportunity of love and companionship he was presented with in his former life. The emotions that he once felt, filling him with a deep sense of regret, longing for the warmth he feels on these moonlit nights. With Kentaro Miura's passing, we don't know if we'll ever see an end to this story. For now, this is all the information we're given about Griffith, and at this possible end, who is the man turned demon we call Griffith? He was a boy who grew up in the back alleys of an unknown kingdom, one who yearned to rise above the lowly station he had been given in life. Gifted an object of immense power that foretold his acquisition of the world, Griffith grew into a man who was focused solely on obtaining the dream he had dreamt since he was a child, the right to one day form a kingdom of his own. With his larger-than-life personality, he would attract thousands of people to his cause, rallying them with not only his person, but his awe-inspiring deeds as well, cutting a path through the world as a man to be feared, leading an organization of unstoppable mercenaries. Through his determination, Griffith would come within an arm's length of obtaining his dream, before he shattered all prospects of realizing it with one mistake. A mistake that cost him, quite literally, everything. After being presented with the opportunity to rekindle this dream by committing the allies that had brought him so far to sacrifice, Griffith emerged from a cocoon of evil and immediately showed his true colors as he violated Casca in the worst way possible, while his former friend watched in horror and disgust. Over the next few years, Griffith, now Femto, would bide his time and wait for the moment of his eventual reincarnation into his human form, carving his way through the world and setting in motion the events that would plunge the world into an age of darkness, causing the deaths of thousands of people as demonic creatures emerged from the astral world to begin ravaging its populace. Griffith in his human form was a wondrous person, a man to be admired and envied, but beneath that fine veneer lay a man who was willing to sacrifice everything and anything in order to fulfill an entirely self-centered dream. Though the men who served under him enjoyed a certain amount of prosperity, when it came down to it, that prosperity mattered very little to Griffith, and the deaths of their person even less. He wasn't wholly without empathy, and deep down, he cared about his men, but his insatiable lust for his one desire clouded every emotion and thought he had. And when it came time to decide whether he would spare his men and forego his dream, he chose to damn them in order to fulfill it, seeing to the slaughter of the faithful few that remained to him. Upon transforming, he would see to it that this sacrificial mayhem was perpetrated on a grand scale, dooming the world to darkness as he thrived in the light of his own glory. Even still, the emotions he had pushed down haunted him so, and sometimes we don't know the consequences of our desires until it's too late. When it comes down to it, Griffith is an exceptionally talented, yet inherently selfish man, a man who was put on a path from birth, but one who ultimately made his own choices, a person who caused the death and misery of thousands of people, friend and foe alike, all for the sake of himself. And when presented with darkness, he willingly chose to cloak himself in its embrace, rather than shun it for the folly it is, leaving him a man who holds regret and emotion locked away within himself, that hardly makes up for the horrid actions he took. Actions that doom himself to live an existence entirely dedicated to evil. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Analyzing Evil, and I hope you've enjoyed. What are your thoughts on Griffith? Did I miss anything? Let me know down below, and leave a suggestion for a villain you'd like to see featured in a future episode while you're at it. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up button, and make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. A big thank you to all of my subscribers, and to my patrons, and a most vile thank you to those whose names you're seeing on screen now. Join the channel's Discord server and Reddit to interact with myself and the community, and follow me on the social media platforms listed below to keep up with the channel. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you soon.